All right, so this video, we are going to be covering all the specs. And coming into Dragonflight, we're going to make a tier list as to which one is best for the average gamer. For the average World of Warcraft player, which spec is best for you, and which spec is the worst. So, first we're going to start off with the Demon Hunters, both Demon Hunter classes. So we have Havoc and Vengeance. Both are looking really good in Dragonflight. They're a lot of fun to play. You jump around, a lot of mobility, melee class, tanky, lots of utility, just overall a lot of fun to play. And if you're an edgy kind of person, it's the one for you. So for this, we're going to actually put both of these in S tier for their respective roles, one tank, one DPS. The next on the list is the new class Evoker. So Evoker is an interesting one because it's a mid-range class. So that meaning you're not quite range, you're not quite melee. The DPS spec's range is 25 yards, and the healing spec, which is preservation, is 30 yards. It's a lot of fun, very highly mobile range class, but it's not as mobile as some other classes like BM Hunter. The overall rotation for it is very straightforward and simple. It's something that I actually am probably going to be switching to in Dragonflight from Death Knight, and overall just a really enjoyable class to play. It does really good damage too, and so because of that, we're going to throw that in S tier as well, both of them. The healing spec is going to be fun to do in raid. It's going to be a very good spec overall, and I think Blizzard is probably going to be tuning it to be mid to top. I think that's going to be the tuning goal for it. They're not going to tune it at the top because then everybody's going to play it and complain, and then they're not going to tune it at the bottom because everyone's going to perceive it as a bad spec. So it's a pretty safe bet to play overall. The next we're going to cover is the 3 hunter specs. So we have Beastmaster, Survival, and Marksman Hunter. Beastmaster is a ranged class that uses pets to do its damage for it. So you don't actually really do any damage as the BM Hunter. It's all of your pets damage that does everything for you. Highly mobile. It is the class to do jobs. It is the working class out of all the specs. If there is an ad you need to CC that's out of the way, the BM Hunter is going to do it. If there is a pool you have to go stand in and soak, the BM Hunter is going to do it. The BM Hunter is going to hit all of the explosive orbs in Mythic Plus, and it's going to do basically all the jobs of every class. It is a very important class to be. People like to meme it because its rotation is relatively simple, and it's just super mobile, so people just like to meme on it. But it's really fun, and if you like to play around with pets and have your own little, I guess your, I don't even know the word right now, but bunch of pets. It's not coming to my head, but if you want to have a bunch of pets and running around and going collecting pets, it's a really fun one. It's very laid back, and if you're good, you're good. One of my friends is really good at this class. Wow, so we're gonna throw that in S tier for Delta. Next is Survival Hunter. This is the melee spec of Hunter. Haven't really heard much or seen much action when it comes to Dragonflight specific, but a lot of people that play this class, they stick with it and they really enjoy the class itself. From what I've heard, it's supposed to be very similar to how it plays in Shadowlands currently, but there's just a little bit less damage output to make it more in line with everybody else, so it's not as cranked as what it was in Shadowlands. So I would say this is a solid class to play if you are in the mindset of being this sort of skulker in the forest and you want to attack with poisons and be very agile. It's got a lot of mobility with it. It also uses a pet to work with it. Basically, if you go through the World of Warcraft lore, this is the Rexar of the specs. It's really fun if you enjoy it. For me, I enjoyed it back in Legion when it was, for me, it felt more complex, but it did no damage. This time now they've made it a little bit simpler from what I've heard from people. and seen, but it does more damage. So I mean, that's a win there. So why not put it in the S for that? Marksman needs a little bit of love right now. Normally it does fairly well. Normally of the 3 hunter specs, it's typically near the top. For most fights, it's generally the stronger of the 3 specs, because it is less forgiving. And I think Blizzard likes to tune Marksman Hunter a little bit stronger compared to BM and Survival because of that reason. It definitely gets more punishment from moving. You are more of a turret, but the way you can think of yourself in the world is that you are a sniper. Your job is to sit back and call the shots, shoot get the target, get the kills. Rotation is overall not too bad. It's pretty straightforward from when I played it in Dragonflight beta. And I think that with some good tuning, it will be a good, solid pick to play. And overall, I think it's going to be a fun class for people to play. So we're going to put that back up in the S tier because, well, if you like playing Marksman, play Marksman. Next, we're going to cover is the mages. So the mage specs are Arcane, Fire, and Frost. Arcane Mage, you're a master of the arcane arts, blasting arcane power towards the enemy. Fire, similar thing, except it's fire, and Frost, you got power of frost. Arcane typically dominates in, from what I've seen previously in the last couple expansions, AoE, but also they do pretty good in single target. They just kind of spam one ability in AoE, and in single target they have a unique rotation, I would say, for compared to other DPS specs, and that mana is actually a thing for them, whereas other specs it isn't. So they actually have you build up all of your mana, and then you burn it off, and then you build it up again. It actually was what I played back in Wrath of the Lich King, and it was a pretty fun spec to play, and I'd still enjoy playing it when I test it out or do other things with it, but I'm not a mage player. For me, there's just not, it's not my fantasy, but mage has a lot of utility. Often mages are brought in case there are a lot of soaks in dungeons. They need them. You need to have a bloodlust in all content, so mages are an easy pick for that generally. And you also get arcane intellect buff, which buffs intellect by 5%. So it's all in all a very good class to play. Or is it 3%? I don't even bother to know because I'm not a mage. Next is Fire Mage. So Fire Mage typically is the strongest of the mage specs almost every tier, it seems, for the last like 2 expansions. It's a very solid pick to play. Oftentimes the ignite and the play style of it is what gets Fire Mage its damage out of it. It's very strong in Mythic Plus because of ignite. It, from what I remember and play, I'm not so great at mage, so just bear with me. It does lose a little bit in single target compared to Arcane and Frost, but it does really good in AoE. If you like throwing fire, it's an S tier for you, because that's what matters, what you like to play. Frost, you throw icicles at people. Good single target. Not so great in Mythic Plus, generally, unless there's some sort of tier set bonus that buffs it up or something goes on with it. But overall, Frost is doing pretty good. I'd say for Dragonflight, from what I've heard from other mages talking, is that Fire and Frost are looking really good in terms of just overall damage. But I mean, fuck it. Fuck damage. Who gives a fuck about damage when you're just going to be throwing icicles, having fun at people? Having fun. So let's put that up in S tier. You're starting to see a trend here. All right, now the 3 monk specs. So we have Mistweaver, Brewmaster, and Windwalker. All 3 specs right now are actually doing decently well. Mistweaver, out of the healers, is not doing as great as the other ones. People got maybe a lot of flack for that in the video, but I mean, it's all relative to each other, which is why tier lists are fucking stupid. Because it's all relative. If something is 0.5 better, or like 1% better, it's better. So you got to throw it up there. It doesn't matter if it's 2% or 3%, it's a percentage better, which is what pisses people off, because you divide them up and like all these things are maybe like a 5% difference. between all the specs, but because of that difference, rightfully you gotta change it, which is why tier lists are stupid. And I'm making fun of them right now if you don't notice that. Now, next, this is Mistweaver. So Mistweaver, you use mist and sort of like healing energies from the monasteries in in Pandaland to create healing energy and bring forth life into your teammates. My favorite thing with Mistweaver is definitely the fact that in Dragonflight you are able to fist weave. It is so much fun to fist weave. It may not be as good as like a holy priest in terms of healing overall, but it is way more fun to sit there and just be damaging the enemy to regain your mana and just throwing out heals all day and all raid. It's a lot of fun. I would seriously, if you are interested in healers, please check it out. If you want to play a healer that's more involved than just pressing your heal buttons, I would definitely check out Mistweaver. And for that, I'm throwing it in there. It also gives a physical damage buff to the raid. So if you need to hit the target, it gives a damage buff. Big thumbs up for that. Brewmaster. So Brewmaster, you are a drunken fighter. You are taking all the damage and staggering it off because you're so drunk that you don't feel anything till later. If only that was true. You breathe fire, you throw kegs at people, and you kick and you spin. You've got a lot of mobility. It's a really unique class. It's a little difficult for people to get onto and play initially, but it's fun. It's a really enjoyable class. It's actually one of the tanks that I prefer to play as. I'm not a huge fan of the sword and board kind of tanking. I like the idea of blood DK tanking and Brewmaster tanking. I find those are a little bit more fun, a little bit more engaging, rather than just click button, don't hurt me. So this is, I think, for tanking wise, if you want to play something that's highly mobile, and like generally is pretty strong in most tiers of content, go with Brewmaster. It's a lot of fun. Windwalker. So Windwalker right now is definitely one of the top specs in terms of DPS. If that is your game, DPS, Windwalker is your main, right? If DPS is your game, Windwalker is your main. If you want to play that, I would say, more tunings to come with Windwalker. It definitely is like one of the more interesting DPS specs in the game. So you are going to be throwing out, you got a couple different abilities you have. Actually, not a couple is an understatement. You have a lot of abilities to choose from and use, and it makes the rotation overall very unique. It has a lot of mobility. One of the fun things with Windwalker monks is throwing down, with all monks in general, is throwing down your transcendence, a little teleporty thing, so you can actually like jump off, go interrupt something, and pop back. It's a lot of fun if you want to play in that way. High skill ceiling if you like that kind of a play style, but a high reward as well. It is one of the, typically it's a very good damaging spec, but not a lot of people play it, unfortunately. So we're gonna throw Windwalker up there in S tier. There we have the Paladins. So the Paladins, we have Holy, Protection, and Retribution. These are the classic style Paladin. You heal, you protect, you fight. Holy Paladin is definitely a fun healer to play. For me, I like to play healers that do damage, because I care more about that than I do about hitting my heal button and being top on the healing meters. Holy Paladin generally is always picked in raid because of its ability to cast Devotion Aura, as well as its myriad of other utility that it has. It's definitely out of all of the healers, probably top in terms of utility wise, useful utility, because everything is going to, all content, like a bop is super handy to have. Devotion Aura, it has a battle res now. There's a couple other things, but it's a really good healer. Not the top of the top healers, but it is a good healer generally it's the healer that's going to be sitting there in melee, healing up the tanks. That's its job, because it's going to sit there, and the closer it is to people, it heals those people more. So for having a fun, damage-centered healing ability, I'm going to put Holy Paladin in S tier. Prop Paladin. So Prop Paladin right now is kind of like a resident sleeper tank, I think is going to end up being the way it's going to turn out. I'm excited to kind of see what happens with this throughout Dragonflight and with Mythic Plus. Prop Paladin does an insane amount of damage right now out of all the tanks. It is crazy. It does fall off with its ability to survive, though, compared to other tanks, but it's still really good. It's really fun. And if you are just doing casual content, it works totally fine. There's no reason to pick this over Prop Warrior or Vengeance DH. It's a good tank. Play it if you want to play a sword and board that throws your shield like Captain America. It's fun. Give it a try. Retribution Paladin. Retribution Paladin is all about using the light to smite and smote the enemies. And it's got a lot of damage. It does a lot of damage again. Like this, the Ret always typically does good damage. And it's always a good solid spec. People, like I said before, people will shit on Retribution because it's a little bit slower than other specs. It might not have as much useful abilities or utility compared to some of the other melee that get brought into raids that are necessary for the raid to do really high-end damage in, once again, high-end content, not casual stuff, or like, I'm going to progress through and get cutting edge by the end of the tier. Can't play Retribution because it's going to 6 months from now when Retribution has all of the things it needs to be really good. Yeah, it's going to be really good for anybody that's pushing content. So play Ret if you like playing Ret. Like, just do it. It's fun. Priests. So priests are close to home for me. So I started playing World of Warcraft. Restarted playing World of Warcraft again in Legion, and I was a Holy Priest main for the first 2 tiers until Tomb of Sargeras, in which I switched to Discipline Priest, and I played Discipline Priest in Tomb of Sargeras, getting cutting edge on that, and that was a lot of fun. Disc Priest and Holy Priest are a lot of fun. Holy Priest is definitely the like go-to, I'm going to hit you with a strong, solid, single target heal. It's got a lot going for it in that sense. When you die as a Holy Priest, you actually come back as an angel for, I think, 30 seconds, and you can keep healing while you're dead. Discipline Priest doesn't have that cool angel ability, which is unfortunate, but Discipline Priest will heal you with its shields. It uses its damaging abilities and void abilities to heal through atonement charges. It's a kind of a mix between the shadow side and like the void side of Priest and the holy side of Priest. It's definitely my favorite Priest healer. And I would say for raid healing, it is my favorite, by far, favorite raid healer. 100%. It is the most fun because with a Discipline Priest in raid, if you know the fight, you are rewarded for it very handsomely with having good ramps and having really, really high burst healing. I still remember doing KJ Prague, and once I finally got the beginning of the fight down and where to stand and how to move and how quickly I need to ramp and all that, I was able to basically solo heal the first set of adds in the Kill Jaden fight after all the nerfs were done. But it was still like very impressive to me at the time, and the other healers didn't have to do anything. They just had to spot heal while I was ramping. It was pretty fun. But because both of them are good, and like Holy Priest right now honestly is probably one of the better healers right now, and especially if you want to do Mythic Plus content, because it does have a strong single target and spot healing. It has a strong damage, and it has PI, which is probably going to make it really good if granted the meta. So if you want to play a healer that's got 2 healing specs in it, and a lot of diversity between the two healing specs, play Priest. Shadow Priest, don't know too much about this one. It's getting lots of reworks here and there. It's getting a lot of spell changes. It's currently going through the ringer when it comes to fixing it up. But from when I played Shadow Priest, it was fun. I did play some Shadow Priest on beta. It was pretty fun once I kind of figured out like a build-ish for it. It does a ton of AoE damage right now. As long as the ads stay alive for like more than 20 seconds, it can do a ton of AoE damage. It's definitely has that going for it. Its single target rotation is definitely very dot centered, and it's actually not too bad. So if you want to be someone who is a flex player, can dip into Shadow Priest, or you like having that dot play style, Shadow Priest is definitely a one to look into. All right, next is Rogue. So Rogue I played for a hot minute back in BFA when I was trying to figure out what class I wanted to main, because I didn't know. I was working full-time, had a kid on the way, and I was like, I don't have time to raid or do too much Mythic Plus, so let's figure out something to do. And so I played Rogue, and I played all the specs of Rogue. Assassination Rogue, you were very dot centered. You want to keep your poisons on your target. Overall, it's a pretty solid spec to play. It plays really well in multi-dotting situations, and I think the class, as you go from 1 target to 2 targets to 3 targets, it becomes more and more interesting to actually play Assassination Rogue. Rogues in general are really useful in raid for soaking mechanics, where rogue soak. That is the rogue's job, to sit there and soak, to do CCs. They're a very mobile class. They have a lot of jobs to do during raids, and typically are picked to do, like I said, the CCs as well as soaks. So I'm going to put Assassination Rogue in S tier. Outlaw Rogue. So Outlaw Rogue was actually the rogue spec that I played in BFA during Eternal Palace. It was an interesting spec. I wanted to play it for Mythic Plus mostly. The gambling aspect and like roll the bones is actually kind of fun, because like when you hit the really high numbers, you get that little bit of a rush dopamine hit. You're like, oh yeah, 5, woohoo! And when you rolled crappy, it felt crappy. But I did have a lot of fun playing that spec. It did have a lot of easy. I felt it had an easier time leveling when I was doing leveling content with it compared to Assassination and Subtlety. But it's a lot of fun. You are essentially a pirate of the 7 seas, shooting people with your flintlock pistol and slashing them with your sword and drinking and rolling dice. It's fun. It's a really good fantasy class to play. And then Subtlety Rogue. This one you are kind of like the ninja rather than the assassin. So the assassin being you're going to poison the person, whereas Subtlety is like, I'm going to come out of the shadows, stab you, and run back away. It's a very highly mobile class. And in general with rogues, one of the 3 specs is going to be doing good. Generally, Rogue has 1 spec near the top, and typically it's Assassination or Subtlety. But in Mythic Plus, it will either be Outlaw or Subtlety. So Subtlety has always been a pretty good contender, pretty mid-ground for all the rogue specs in general. Sometimes it's low, but sometimes it's high. So I would say if you want to play rogue, you want to be that sneaky person, you want to be able to cheat death, you want to be able to help your raid out a lot with utility wise, but also play in melee, play a rogue. Shamans. So we have Ellie, Enhance, and Resto Shaman. So Shamans wield elements, so enhancement enhances their weapons with nature. Ellie was going to throw out lightning bolts, and Restoration is going to splash you with water. With Ellie Shaman, it's a fun like when I played it, it was one of the other classes that I played in BFA a lot, and I did do some testing in it in beta. Because what I was looking for when I started beta was to look for a a range class that can also heal, and it's something that I enjoy the rotation of both. So I wanted to be able to play and have that ability to swap, because I like healing in Raid and in Mythic Plus, but we already have, my Raid's already got enough healers in it, so it's like we don't need more healers, we need more damage. So it's like, well, if I'm going to be playing damage, I want to be playing something that has a fun rotation. Now, the beautiful thing with Shaman is that you have 3 overarching specs. You've got melee, you've got range, and you have a healer. The only thing it's missing is a tank spec. And Ellie Shaman it's typically pretty good. Like, if you later, like maybe not the beginning of a season for content, but typically Ellie Shaman does hold its own in both Mythic Plus content later on in the expansion, and can push fairly decently high keys. Enhancement Shaman has gotten a ton of buffs and changes to it to make its playstyle like way more fun. Like, it is a really fun playstyle. If you like hitting the shiny button, hit play Enhancement or rest or Ellie. They're both kind of similar in that sense. Now, you might have seen recently that Enhancement Shaman got a bunch of nerfs. That's okay. It needed it. It was it was actually too good in single target, by far, like hands above, like miles above every other spec. It's unfortunate that they used it to go into the live version of it, but the beta version and what's going to be played in Dragonflight is really strong. So I actually, and not to mention, like, Shaman utility is good. I know I said like Holy Paladin is the best for terms of healer utility. Holy Paladin and all the Paladin specs have tons of utility. Shaman also has a ton of utility. I'd say the Shaman utility is more unique rather than just general and broad. Shaman brings in like earth elementals. It has its own battle res that it uses on itself. It can remove poisons if you go down that route. It has the shortest interrupt out of all the classes. It is also a like mid-range interrupt, so I think it's 25 yards. So Enhance has a 25, I think it's Enhance and Restoration Shaman both can get talent into that and get that extra little boost out of it. The only other class that has like a slightly ranged interrupt as a melee is Death Knight. Restoration Shaman is always brought to raid. It's almost always brought to raid. So if you want to raid and you want a guaranteed spot, play Resto Shaman. Resto Shaman has very good raid healing. It has, but mostly because of like SLT, Spirit Link Totem. It's just always, almost always taken. Like, I'd say in the last, 2 expansions, there was almost on every fight all the way through progression, maybe some changes here and there depending on the fight. Resto Shaman was brought. Resto Shaman does lose a little bit of its healing when things are more spread out. I think that in Vault of the Incarnates, Resto Shaman is going to be a fairly solid healer. It may not be the best healer because it doesn't have the same damage output as, say, like a Holy Priest does, and it doesn't have the same healing output as like a Disciplined Priest or like an Evoker. But with its general power, it sits kind of nicely in the middle, and there's still more tuning to come. Like, they can easily buff a lot of the stuff that's to kind of bring it up to the rest of the levels of everything else. It generally is not as strong in Mythic Plus most of the time. I know in Shadowlands it had its moments where it kind of ebbed and flowed up and down. But once again, the difference between healers is generally like a handful of % difference if you look at them. So if you are that much into min-maxing, I mean, you probably would have clicked off this video already because you've been like, this guy's a fucking idiot. All right, next is the Warlock spec. So Warlock is another spec that I played back in BFA and played it again in beta to test it out to see how it felt, just in case I wanted to switch to like something that was always good. And I mean that for honesty, 100% honest. Warlock is always good. There is always a spec of Warlock that is not even say overpowered, but is definitely the strongest of the bunch. I think there was a chart that came out about a month ago that looked at all the specs of every DPS class over the last couple expansions and which one was on the top according to Warcraft logs. And I think Warlock was up there like 90% of the time. They were number one. One of the 3 specs was up there 90% of the time. For me, all the specs are pretty fun. They vary in their funness for me. I prefer playing Demo. I like the idea of like summoning the little imps and then having them go and explode. Affliction is really fun when it's like a 2-target cleave or multi-dotting sort of idea. And then Destruction is hit button, big damage. It's very simple overall. There is a decent high skill ceiling for all of these specs just because of making sure you know the fight, you know your timings, and enhancing your cooldown windows as best you can. It's a lot of fun. If you like having a DPS class that's always guaranteed to have one of its specs doing really, really good. So we're going to put that there. But we're going to put Destruction down in the D tier, mostly because THD loves Destruction, and he doesn't stop complaining about whenever Warlock isn't number 1 on the damage meters. So this is for THD. Stop complaining. Just kidding. But yeah, we'll leave it down there. So that'd be people when they click through, they're gonna be like, what the fuck? And then they have to scroll backwards. Warriors. So Warrior's a fun class, depending on what kind of a person you are when it comes to playing melee. Right now, Prot Warrior plays really fun. Prot Warrior is a lot of fun. It's very fast, very fluid. Definitely, in my opinion, from what I played, the best designed tank spec in Dragonflight. It also happens to be very strong. Granted, tuning is still probably going to come through and knock it on its ass, but it's a very fun tank. It probably the most fun thing with warrior tanks, other than like constantly like just hitting the buttons to make yourself go and be nice and strong, is Spell Reflect. It is such a cool spell. That's such a cool ability and it really rewards players that understand what can be spell reflected and what can't be spell reflected and what should be spell reflected. So there are boss fights where if you are getting hit by, or like the boss will channel an ability, and so as soon as it channels that ability, all right, halfway through the cast, I'm gonna pop spell reflect, and you reflect it back, and all of a sudden you do a huge fucking load of damage, and everyone's like, oh my god, warrior's broken. It's really fun in that sense. Fury, make sure that you have your chiropractor or physio on call, because you are probably going to get repetitive stress injuries in your wrist, and you'll be go tick, 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 tick. It's button lights up, hit that button. It's really fast paced. It's my favorite DPS warrior spec between the two to play because it's very fast paced and very enjoyable to me. I'm going to put both of them up in the S tier. Now with Arms Warrior is, if you are very methodical, it is definitely a higher skill ceiling type of class compared to Fury, just because of if you press your buttons too quickly, you're going to fuck up and you're going to run out of energy or run out of rage, and you're just going to be kind of sitting there waiting to regen things, and the game's going to punish you and go, you shouldn't have done that. Now, one thing with Arms is it's typically, of the two, the stronger single target class. So Fury's typically always stronger in AoE situations, and Arms is typically always stronger in single target situations. All warriors have an execute. They're always brought to raid. At least one is always brought to raid because they bring Battle Shout. And it's a lot of fun just being able to leap around. They have fairly high mobility, and if you watch players like Revez, it's pretty amazing to see what a warrior is capable of doing, especially an Arms warrior or like just a warrior in general is capable of doing. He's got some 5-head plays that he does. If you watch his some reviews of people watching and going over his gameplay back during Sylvanas, it's pretty it's impressive, and there's a reason why he's in after there's a reason why is where he is. All right, so next, what was this? Next is Druid, and I want to save DK for last because that is my class that I currently play. Druid is a lot of fun. Once again, all these classes are really fun to play, which is why I'm putting them S, except for Destruction Luck. Destruction Luck's in D because of people complaining whenever Warlock is not number 1. And it's just to kind of irk them a little bit, because people get really pissy when they see their class like one thing down compared to from S tier. Let's see how many complaints and thumbs down I get from this one. All right. Resto Druid, very good and typically in some form of content. It's if you want to just sit there and be a heal bot, you can totally do that. But for me, the fun in Resto Druid, and same with Bear Tank, is doing damage as these two specs. They are very unique in that you can switch between like bear form and cat form, or as a druid from your healing regular form, unless you want to be a tree all day, and your cat form. I find that switching between the two adds that extra little bit of level of complexity to the spec and makes it a lot more fun and engaging during raid fights, especially during during farm raids. So the problem that comes up, and you hear people talking about all the time, is that in non-progress raiding, so farm content, healing and tanking becomes very bleh, because you know what to expect. Like, the healers get stronger, so there's less healing that needs to go out, and the tanks get stronger, so there's less worry about their abilities. It's like, oh, I don't have to press this ability this time, so maybe I can do an extra, maul or whatever. Use my abilities a little bit more liberally to try and irk out a little bit more damage. Whereas Bear and Restoration Druid, they're like, oh, I'm going to throw out a bunch of heals, and now that there's no damage coming out, let me switch into cat form and throw a couple bleeds on the target. Or like as Bear, I'm no longer the tank taking damage from the boss. Let me throw out some bleeds onto it as a cat. It makes it a lot of fun. For me, that's what I like those two classes for. Feral Druid plays very similarly to Rogue, in that Rogue, well, mostly Assassination Rogue, because or Rogue in general, because with Rogue you earn your combo points and you spend your combo points and you put up your dots. With Feral Druid, you are doing a very similar rotation in that you are building up your combo points to do more damage, to put bleeds on the target, to generate more combo points and more energy, and repeat, rinse, and repeat. Feral Druid right now is crazy in its terms of damage. Like, typically it's always the bottom of the pack, but with the talent tree changes and tuning changes that have happened to it over the last little bit, especially in beta, it is now probably one of the higher top tier specs, potentially going into Dragonflight. And you're going to see a lot of bottom players potentially re-roll from Rogue to Feral Druid because of that reason, as a possibility. Now, Feral Druid doesn't have the same utility as the Rogues do, but what Feral Druid does have a really good advantage of is that it has crazy off healing. It does, just simply by doing its rotation. It does so much healing. It's like Shadow Priest is the same. I forgot to mention that. Shadow Priest healing is buffed, and so is Feral Druid healing. So it's almost like you don't like it heals as much as the average tank. It's really good and a lot of fun. I would definitely give it a try if you want to play a Druid. And the nice thing with Druid too is that you have a melee spec, a tank spec, a healing spec, and a range spec. So you can actually play all 4 positions and flex between them as needed, depending on if you want to play the best DPS spec. You can swap between Boomkin and Feral. If you want to play a healer for a fight, you can be Resto. If you want to tank in Mythic Plus, you can tank. If you want to run old content, you can be a cat form and just quickly rip through all the old content, doing lots of farming runs. It is the overall, just like, I'd say it's the best class for the casual person outside of BM Hunter. Next is Boomkin. So Boomkin generally is pretty solid. You can pretty much stack them in higher end content because they don't necessarily bring a buff, but they do a lot of damage and they're very tanky. Don't need a lot of healing most of the time. A solid spec to play. If you only want to play Druid as a Boomkin, go for it. But Boomkins kind of sit in the same boat as Destruction Warlocks. As soon as they're nerfed just like this much, they roll on the floor and have a tantrum that's higher than my 3-year-old. So for Tettles this time, D tier. Dettles. Lastly, we're going to do the Death Knight. So this is my class that I currently play. I am a Frost DK main, and I'll go into Unholy begrudgingly if I need to. Then you have Blood Death Knight as well. And so Blood Death Knight's a really unique tank in that you're not really mitigating damage, but you're healing up the damage, and that's your form of mitigation. And you put a shield on yourself by doing it too. It's typically a very strong tank to play. It always holds its own in higher end content because it doesn't need a healer. Whether it's Mythic Plus or in Raid, the one caveat and downside with Blood DK is that you do have a lack of DPS in comparison to the other tanks that are out there, but it makes up for it by not needing a healer. And it's a fun tank. I've always enjoyed playing Blood DK. If you like giving your healer a heart attack on a regular basis because you're going from 90% to 30% back to 90% again, play Blood DK. Play Blood DK. Seriously. Unholy DK and Frost DK, they're fun. They're necessary in a lot of groups because of Grip. Grip is a very useful utility tool. AMZ also comes into play in Dragonflight, not so much now in retail because it's just hard to spec into it. But AMZ is a pretty solid cooldown in Mythic Plus. Both of these specs generally fare well. Frost DK is always better in sustained AoE, whereas Unholy is single target and like burst AoE ish. Frost is my favorite for. I love keeping Breath of Cindergrosa up. If you want to play a DPS spec that is very self-sufficient in its ability to absorb damage, take damage, and heal itself, I highly suggest playing Blood DK, or highly suggest playing Frost or Unholy DK. And in general, Frost and Unholy, typically they sit middle-ish in terms of DPS overall. And most raid groups will want to have at least one. For Grips, AMZ, and now they give a attack speed slow debuff to the boss. So they're probably going to be wanted, maybe not all the time, but generally there's a desire for them. In Mythic Plus groups, they're generally wanted because if their damage is high enough. But they always, like, once again, it goes back to the whole thing. If a fire mage is doing 5% more DPS overall than an Unholy DK or a Frost DK, they're going to take the fire mage. But it's still a good class. You can still push high keys. I think the highest key I did this season or this expansion was like a 22, 23. I also didn't care about pushing. I just wanted to get my portals for the most part. I didn't really care about pushing high keys, but they always have the chance to push high keys. Same with Blood DK. I'm always typically able to do about 5 to 7 keys higher than the minimum, or higher. That's where it goes. So for that, I'm going to put both the DK specs into S tier. So this is my perfect. This is the perfect tier list for the World of Warcraft specs. If you are not in a top 100 guild or pushing for rank 1 in PvP or pushing for rank 1 and Mythic Plus. If you're just playing this game casually for fun, you're doing cutting edge as a, we'll get it done by the end of the tier. We're not pushing for Hall of Fame. You can play literally any of these specs. And if you like to complain a lot about your spec when it gets nerfed just the slightest bit, you can play Destruction, Warlock, or you can play Boomkin. Hopefully you enjoyed this little bit of fluff. I enjoyed thinking about it and recording it. And yeah, it's just all just play what you want. Don't worry about what the tier lists say. If a tier list comes out and your favorite spec is A, B, or C and not S, just remember that it's all relative. So if one class is doing 5% more damage, it will be above it, guaranteed, in terms of the tier lists, unless it's got some sort of ridiculous utility thing that's going on. But anyways, I digress. I ramble. Play what you want, have fun. This is a fun game. Don't pigeonhole yourself into playing a spec that you don't enjoy simply because somebody told you it does better. It's better. If you want to do 20s, any of these specs will work. Any of these specs will do a 20. It's easy. It's not hard. You just have to play your spec well. So sit down, hit a target dummy, practice your rotation, practice your spec, and you'll be able to do any high-end content. Thanks for watching. Bye.